Do you ever find yourself just caught, like in this endless loop of thought, replaying yesterday's worries or, fast forwarding to tomorrow's anxiety?
Yeah, that constant voice in your head.
Exactly. That chattering voice always pulling you away from right here.
Mm-hmm.
If that sounds familiar, then welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're taking a really profound journey, I think, into Eckhart Tolle's groundbreaking work, The Power of Now, a guide to spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah, and this isn't just any book, is it? It's huge. #1 New York Times bestseller, sold millions. It's clearly struck a chord.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon.
And our mission for this deep dive really is to distill the absolute most transformative insights from Tolle's teachings.
Right.
We want to help you uncover a path to inner peace, maybe lasting freedom, just by living in the present moment.
Simple idea, profound implications.
Totally. So we're going to explore what he means by being, how you can genuinely free yourself from the tyranny of your own mind.
The mind trap.
Yeah. And even discover this unexpected way to transform pain into presence. Okay, let's really unpack this.
Let's do it.
So to start, Tolle opens the book with his own incredible story. It's deeply personal. He talks about being in this state of intense unhappiness, almost despair.
Right.
And this thought kept repeating, I cannot live with myself any longer. What was it about that thought? Why was that so pivotal for him?
Well, it's fascinating because that specific thought, I cannot live with myself, it's suddenly sparked this deeper realization, like, hang on, if I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me.
Ah, the observer and the observed.
Exactly. That insight, recognizing a self he couldn't live with, and I'm just watching it, apparently caused his mind to just stop completely.
Wow.
He was fully conscious, but zero thoughts. He describes this intense fear first, like being pulled into a void.
That sounds terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. But then he heard these words, maybe internally resist nothing, and he just surrendered, and the fear vanished.
Incredible. And the next morning he wakes up, hears a bird.
Yeah, and it sounded like, what a diamond.
Yeah. Like the most precious thing. Everything seemed fresh, pristine, radiating love. He felt like he'd shed a skin, realizing his true nature wasn't that chattering mind.
Which he'd identified with his whole life.
Right. But it was this ever-present I am, this pure awareness. And then he spent, nearly 2 years just sitting on park benches?
Just experiencing intense joy. Can you imagine?
It's wild.
And that initial, peak joy eventually matured into this profound underlying peace, a peace that he says just never left him.
And when people started asking, how do I get what you have?
His answer basically became the power of now. He'd tell them essentially, you already have it, you just can't feel it because your mind is making way too much noise.
So, after this incredible personal shift, Tolle makes this distinction about thought itself that I found really mind-bending. He argues that thinking is valuable, sure, but it's not the same as consciousness. Can you unpack that a bit? What's his core idea about this voice in our head?
Right. This is central. He argues that the voice in your head, those involuntary thoughts most of us hear almost constantly, that voice is not who you are.
Okay, that's the radical part.
That's the shift.
Yeah.
Because when we identify with that incessant thinking, we create what he calls a phantom self, or the ego.
The ego.
Yeah. And this ego, it's built from our personal history, our cultural conditioning, all that stuff. And it lives almost entirely in memory and anticipation.
So past and future.
Constantly. It's dredging up the past to reinforce its identity or projecting itself into the future, always looking for salvation there. That feeling of, once I get X or achieve Y, then I'll finally be okay.
Ah, the when-then trap. I know that one.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Tolle says, thought is a precious gift. Absolutely. But thinking and consciousness, not synonymous.
Yeah, God.
Consciousness, your true self, he says, exists beyond thought. It's this vast intelligence that doesn't actually need thought to exist.
That implies, wow, a lot of freedom. You can actually put your mind down sometimes.
That's the goal. And the path to getting there, to disidentification, involves this practice he calls watching the thinker.
Watching the thinker, yeah.
It just means listening to that inner voice, not to argue with it or analyze it, but just impartially, without judgment. Because if you judge it,
it just finds another way in.
Exactly. It loops back. It's purely about witnessing.
So as you just listen to it, you start to realize, okay, there's the voice. And here I am listening to it, watching it. And that I am realization, that sense of your own presence. It's not a thought itself.
No, that's key. It arises from beyond the mind. It's like this quiet observer behind or underneath all the mental noise. And when that conscious presence emerges,
The thought loses its power. It just kind of subsides.
exactly, it loses its grip on you. And what's profound is that this state isn't like a trance or spacing out. It's the opposite.
Right. You become more alert.
Much more alert, yeah. More awake. Fully present. It leads to what he calls pure consciousness, where your own presence feels so intensely alive, so joyful, that the thoughts, even the external world, become almost secondary.
And he connects this straight to the Buddha's definition of enlightenment, the end of suffering.
Simple, right.
Yeah, but it's not about becoming superhuman or anything mystical like that. It's actually attainable.
For anyone. Every little gap you create in that stream of thought, even for a second, strengthens the light of your own consciousness. He even says you might find yourself smiling at the voice in your head eventually.
Like you would at a kid's antics.
Yeah, exactly. You see it for what it is.
Okay, so we've talked about the mind's chatter, but what about that deeper stuff, the emotional baggage we carry? Tolle argues that unaddressed emotional pain doesn't just vanish. It forms something he calls the emotional pain body. Can you describe that? What is it? How does it affect us?
Absolutely. The pain body. It's basically this accumulation, this negative energy field that builds up in our body and mind from all the emotional pain we haven't fully faced or processed.
From childhood stuff to just like everyday annoyances.
All of it. It accumulates. And it can lie dormant sometimes, but it also gets activated. In really unhappy people, he says, it might be active a lot of the time.
And when it's active, what happens?
Here's the crucial part. Once activated, it feeds on experiences that resonate with its own negative energy. Things like anger, hatred, grief, resentment, even emotional drama or conflict.
Wow. So it actively seeks out more pain.
In a way, yes. It can take you over, as he puts it. You unconsciously start seeking out more pain, either for yourself, through negative thinking patterns or self-pity, or you might provoke it in others, leading to arguments or drama.
That's kind of unsettling, the idea that we might be unconsciously feeding our own suffering.
It is. He gives an example. People carrying a lot of unresolved anger might find they attract more verbal or even physical attacks from other angry people. It's like they're broadcasting that energy, and the pain body is looking for its next meal.
So how do we transcend this? How do we deal with the pain body?
Well, Tolle explains that true love, joy, and peace are different. They're deep states of being that arise from beyond the mind, and crucially, they have no opposite.
No opposites, unlike, say, pleasure and pain.
Exactly. Mind-derived emotions operate in that dualistic cycle. Pleasure, he points out, is always fleeting and depends on external things. But the joy of being, as he calls it, is uncaused. It just arises from within when you're connected to your deeper self.
So all our cravings, like for possessions or status or even relationships sometimes, are those the mind looking for substitutes?
That's his argument. The mind is seeking salvation or fulfillment in external things or in the future, trying to fill that gap where the joy of being should be. So true freedom doesn't come from suppressing desire, but from becoming present.
Becoming the observer again.
Yes. Being the observer of the mind. It's not enough to just quote ancient wisdom, talk about the Buddha. It's about actually becoming the awakened one in your own life.
Okay, so this process, he calls it alchemy.
Yeah, spiritual alchemy. Sustained conscious attention. Your awareness shining on the suffering actually transmutes it. The pain literally becomes fuel for the flame of your consciousness.
So the awareness burns brighter.
Exactly. And this heals that internal split between the observer and the pain, making you whole again. You bring the light of your consciousness, as he says, into the pain, and it starts to dissolve. The pain body, he insists, is actually afraid of that light. Its survival depends on you staying unconscious and identified with it.
It's a common thing people say, isn't it? I just don't have enough time. But Tolle flips this whole concept of time. He says time and mind are inseparable. How did the being trapped in time keep us from the present?
Well, he draws this really important line between clock time and psychological time.
Okay, what's the difference?
Clock time is the practical stuff. Scheduling meetings, learning from past mistakes, setting future goals. That's functional, necessary.
Right.
But psychological time, that's the dysfunction. That's the dwelling on the past.
Yeah.
Maybe ruminating on guilt, resentment, things you can't change, or it's constantly seeking fulfillment in the future. That illusion that happiness is always just over the horizon.
The one day when syndrome again.
Precisely. And he gives these really stark examples of this insanity of psychological time playing out collectively.
Like ideologies.
Yeah, like communism or extreme nationalism. They promise this future heaven, this utopia, but because the end justifies any means.
They create a present hell.
Exactly. Through immense suffering. He points out these ideologies are linked to tens of millions of deaths, all in the name of future that never arrives in the way they imagine.
And on a personal level, that translates to always trying to get somewhere else. Always feeling like fulfillment is just around the corner.
And he argues the mind, actually, unconsciously, loves problems.
Loves problems.
Because they give it a sense of identity, a story. I'm the person dealing with this. We get so fixated on our life situation, our problems, our story, that we lose touch with life itself, with being.
Wow. So he suggests this radical choice. What is it?
It's simply deciding, I will create no more pain for myself. I will create no more problems.
That sounds almost too simple.
It's profound, though. It's deciding to stop manufacturing internal conflict, internal resistance. And if you stop creating pain for yourself, he argues, you naturally stop creating it for others, too.
Oh, okay. And he also talks about our outer purpose versus our inner purpose.
Right. Another key distinction.
Yeah.
Your outer purpose is about the doing goals, achievements, destinations, future stuff.
Where you're going.
Yeah. But if that outer destination takes up so much of your attention that you ignore the step you're taking right now,
you miss the point of the journey.
You miss the inner purpose, which has nothing to do with where you're going, but everything to do with the quality of your consciousness in this moment. How are you taking this step?
Because that step, the now, is the only thing that's actually real.
That's his point. The only thing ultimately real about your journey is the step you're taking now. Success in the outer world, achieving goals, that's all impermanent. Forms come and go. True fulfillment, lasting fulfillment, comes from realizing your inner purpose, from realizing you are complete and whole now.
Not when you achieve something.
Exactly. Now.
It's interesting. He notes that things like life-threatening emergencies or even really dangerous activities like mountain climbing.
Yeah, they force you into the now, don't they?
Totally. Suddenly, there's no time for past regrets or future worries. You are intensely here.
It's an intensely alive state, yeah. Free of time, free of problems, free of excessive thinking. It's a glimpse.
But you don't need to climb a mountain to get there.
No, that's the point. You don't need extreme situations. You can cultivate that state right now, just sitting here in your everyday life.
And this isn't really a new idea, is it? You look at ancient spiritual masters.
Across traditions, yeah. Zen, Sufism, Jesus, Meister Eckhart. They all pointed to this now. Meister Eckhart's quote is amazing. Time is what keeps the light from reaching us.
Wow. Time is what keeps the light from reaching us.
And the essence of Zen, he says, is just being so utterly present that no problem, no suffering can survive in that presence.
Zen also uses the term satori, right, for those sudden flashes of no mind.
Exactly. Flashes of no mind, total presence, often happens spontaneously, maybe in nature, looking at a flower, really seeing it. Tolle emphasizes the mind can't really recognize beauty, let alone create it.
It requires stillness, presence.
Yeah, to truly perceive the vibrant detail, the life in a flower, or hear the nuance in a bird song. Without your total presence, he says, you might look, but you don't truly see. You might listen, but you don't truly hear.
Moving from the mind to the body, then, Tolle introduces this idea of inhabiting your body fully, feeling its inner energy field. What's this invisible inner body he talks about? Why is tuning into it so important?
He describes this inner body as the animating presence within you, the life force. And it acts as a direct link to what he calls the unmanifested.
The unmanifested, like pure being, formless.
Exactly. That formless, timeless dimension. And what's really intriguing is his suggestion that cultivating this inner body awareness can actually slow down the aging process.
Really?
His theory is that by identifying more with this timeless inner body, rather than just the outer physical form, which is subject to time, you lessen the accumulation of psychological time in your psyche, and somehow even in your cells. This helps preserve their ability to self-renew.
That's a big claim, but interesting.
It is, and it also has big implications for relationships.
How so?
He notes that being deeply in touch with your inner body creates this clear space of no mind. And within that space, relationships can genuinely flower. It moves beyond just two minds, two egos interacting. It opens up a deeper, more present connection.
Makes sense. Now, Tolle also talks about words, especially spiritual words like God or sin. He warns against getting too attached to them.
Yeah, he's very careful about language. He says words like God are just signposts. They point towards a reality, but they aren't the reality itself.
You have to experience it directly.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of honey. You can talk about honey all day long, analyze its properties, but you don't know honey until you taste it. The word points, the experience is.
So it's almost an invitation to look beyond the labels. He suggests replacing sin, for example, with unconsciousness or even insanity.
Right. To get at the reality behind the word, without all the historical baggage and judgment. If you think about collective human violence or destruction as a form of insanity, stemming from deep unconsciousness.
It allows you to observe it differently, without getting caught in blame or guilt.
Precisely. It shifts the focus to the underlying state of mind.
Okay, so beyond the inner body, he points to other everyday portals into this unmanifested, into being. One is silence.
Yes, silence. Not just the absence of noise, but paying attention to the silence itself. The silence out of which sounds arise and into which they return. When you do that, you create inner stillness. A portal opens. External silence helps cultivate internal stillness.
And another one is space, like empty space.
Yeah, becoming aware of space itself. The nothing that holds everything, the space between objects in a room, the space between thoughts. He calls it an externalization of inner stillness and peace.
He says it's the infinitely creative womb of all existence.
Pretty poetic, right? It's the background, the potential from which everything arises.
And he connects space and time internally too, doesn't he?
He does. He says while external space and time are, in a sense, illusory aspects of the world of form, they point to a deeper truth. Externally, they are infinity and eternity. Internally, their equivalents are no mind, which he links to inner space, and presence, which he links to the eternal now or inner time.
Wow, okay. And then finally, there's this involuntary portal, conscious death.
Right. He describes death itself as this brief, final opportunity for spiritual realization, for encountering the unmanifested directly.
But most people miss it.
He suggests most people miss it because of fear and their deep attachment to the manifested world, to their form identity. They turn away. But he insists that in that portal, your radiant true nature remains. Only the personality, the ego dissolves. Nothing truly real is ever lost.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Tolle talks about enlightened relationships, and it's definitely not the typical romance novel view.
Not at all.
He explores why we seek romantic relationships so intensely. What's his take on that feeling of lack or incompleteness we often try to fix with a partner?
Well, he explains that we often project our deep longing for wholeness onto another person. We're looking for them to complete us, essentially.
And sexual union.
He calls it a fleeting glimpse of wholeness, maybe a momentary bliss, a temporary silencing of the mind. But true, lasting wholeness, he argues, can't be found at the level of form through another person.
So what we often call love, he sees it differently.
He distinguishes it sharply. What often passes for love, he says, is actually more like addictive clinging. It stems from neediness, from that sense of lack, and because it's based on need, it can easily flip into its opposite: resentment, anger, hatred, when those egoic needs aren't met.
Whereas true
love, for Tolle, is a state of being. It arises from within, from that connection to the unmanifested. And crucially, it has no opposite. It's unconditional acceptance.
So he's pretty blunt then when he says relationships often become about projecting our pain onto our partner when our needs aren't met.
Very blunt. He says relationships, in their conventional form, are often where the ego plays out its strongest dramas. But then he offers this radical reframe. Relationships are here to make you conscious instead of happy.
Whoa, okay. That's a big one. Here to make you conscious instead of happy.
It's challenging, right? But if you embrace that perspective, relationships become incredibly powerful spiritual practices. They highlight your ego patterns, your pain body activations. They become catalysts for awakening. But if you keep chasing happiness as the primary goal through the relationship,
you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
He warns you'll be disillusioned again and again because the ego's demands can never be permanently satisfied by another person.
He also introduces this specific idea of a collective female pain body. What's that about?
It's the concept that there's an accumulation of emotional pain specific to women, gathered over millennia. Pain from societal subjugation, violence, childbirth, loss. Historical and cultural trauma layered onto personal pain.
And he connects this to the menstrual cycle.
Yes, he notes that the emotional or physical pain many women experience before or during menstruation is often this collective pain body awakening. It gets triggered.
But he sees this not just as suffering, but as an opportunity.
A huge opportunity for enlightenment, yes. Instead of being dragged into unconsciousness or overwhelmed by the pain body, a woman can choose to stay present with it, to observe it, feel it fully, without identifying. And by doing that, she transmutes its energy into consciousness.
So it becomes fuel for awakening.
Exactly. He suggests that in the coming years, many women will actually enter a fully conscious state during these times. And he adds that a conscious male partner can really help by simply holding the space of intense presence, without judgment or trying to fix anything.
Interesting. He also touches on how being an outsider, his example is being gay, can sometimes push people towards awakening.
Yeah, because being outside the mainstream norms can sometimes force a disidentification from societal conditioning, from those collective unconscious patterns. He can kind of shake you awake.
But there's a catch.
The catch is not creating a new ego identity based on that difference, on being the outsider. That just becomes another trap, another identification.
And this next idea is really deep. Giving up the relationship with yourself. What does he mean by that?
He's talking about that duality the mind creates, the I and the myself. I'm angry with myself. I need to improve myself. It's the ego talking to itself, judging itself.
Right.
In enlightenment, he says, that split heals. You and yourself merge into one unified consciousness. There's no longer a separate self that needs protecting, defending, or improving. And when you give that up,
Your relationships with others change.
dramatically. He says they become true love relationships because they're no longer based on egoic need, projection, or trying to complete yourself through the other person. They become relationships based on shared presence.
Which leads to the end of drama.
Pretty much. He argues that most of the so-called bad things and nearly all the drama in our lives are ego-created. They stem from resistance, judgment, identification with thought forms.
So when you're fully conscious,
You simply cease to create or participate in drama, whether you're alone or with others.
Yeah.
You can't even really have an argument with a fully conscious person.
why not?
Because an argument requires identification with a mental position, resistance to another's position, and the need to be right. A conscious person doesn't have those egoic needs driving them. They just accept what is. And he says, when you live in complete acceptance of what is, that is the end of all drama in your life.
Complete acceptance. That sounds huge. He also emphasizes impermanence, doesn't he? Like the Buddha and Jesus taught.
Absolutely. All forms, all situations are temporary. They arise, they stay for a while, they dissolve. There are natural cycles in life, success and failure, gain and loss, high energy and low energy.
And suffering comes from resisting those cycles, especially the down cycles.
Yes. Resisting the down cycles like losing a job, getting sick, feeling low energy, losing status or possessions, that's where suffering arises. In fact, he controversially asserts that the down cycle is absolutely essential for spiritual realization
Why essential?
because it strips away egoic identifications. It forces you to go deeper, beyond the superficial forms you might have been attached to. It humbles the ego.
And again, joy isn't found in the up cycle.
Not lasting joy, he reiterates. Joy is uncaused and arises from within as the joy of being. It's not dependent on external conditions being good. It's about your connection to your inner state.
And our collective world. He sees it as a reflection of our collective mind state, mostly egoic and fear-based.
Largely, yes. But then he offers this incredibly profound concept. Every moment, your consciousness creates the world that you inhabit.
My consciousness creates my world. How does that work?
It's about perception and reaction. The egoic mind perceives through filters of past conditioning and fear and reacts unconsciously, creating suffering and conflict both internally and externally. A conscious mind perceives reality directly without those filters and responds from presence, creating peace.
So those ancient prophecies like the new heaven and a new earth in Revelation or similar ideas in Buddhism, they're not just about some future event.
He interprets them as metaphors for a transformed state of human consciousness, a collective awakening. The outer world changing because the inner world, our collective consciousness, has changed first.
So our main task isn't necessarily trying to fix the world out there.
Not first, anyway. The primary task is to awaken within, to disidentify from form, from the ego, because that inner shift is what ultimately transforms the outer world.
Which brings us perfectly to what Tolle describes as maybe the ultimate art in his teachings. Surrender.
Yes, surrender.
What exactly does he mean by it? Because it sounds passive, like giving up. How is it different?
That's a really common misconception and a great question. He stresses that surrender is a purely inner phenomenon. It's not about resigning yourself to a bad situation externally. It's about accepting the isness of the present moment internally without mental resistance or labeling it as bad.
As if you had chosen it.
Exactly. That's his key phrase. Accept this moment as if you had chosen it. He uses that great analogy of being stuck in the mud.
Right.
Surrender doesn't mean sitting there going, oh, well, I'm stuck forever.
Yeah.
It means fully accepting the reality. Okay, right now I am stuck in the mud. You stop fighting the fact of it internally. You stop the mental negativity, this shouldn't be happening.
And then from that acceptance.
Then from that place of inner non-resistance, you can take clear-headed, positive, effective action to get yourself out of the mud, without the frantic energy of resistance fueling your actions.
So it's acceptance, then action.
Yes. He calls it surrendered action. It's doing, but infused with being. It becomes almost like a joyful celebration of life energy moving through you, rather than a stressful struggle against reality.
And he applies this even to really tough things like illness or disaster.
He does. With illness, he says the condition is part of your life situation, sure. But the idea of illness, the mental label, the story you build around it, that's what often gives it power and creates suffering.
So surrender to the physical sensations now.
Yes. Accept the physical sensations, the discomfort, the weakness, whatever is present right now, without the mental story. He suggests using illness itself as a powerful opportunity for spiritual practice, for enlightenment. Similarly, what he calls limit situations, disasters, deep loss, facing death, these can crack the ego wide open.
They force surrender.
Often, yes, they strip away everything superficial. And in that forced surrender, there's the potential for what he calls a complete alchemical transmutation of the base metal of pain and suffering into gold, turning the worst things into profound awakening.
And the key, again, is presence. Full attention.
Always. Full attention is full acceptance is surrender. When you bring your full, non-judgmental attention to whatever is, right now, psychological time dissolves.
Right.
And without time, suffering and negativity cannot survive.
So facing deep pain, allowing it to be, entering it consciously, that's like dying to the ego.
That's exactly how he puts it. It's to die this death, the death of the false self. And in doing so, you realize there is no death, meaning the death of the ego isn't the death of you, your essential being, and therefore there is nothing to fear. Only the ego dies.
So wrapping it all up, by surrendering moment to moment, you stop creating negativity. You live in, what does he call it?
A state of non-resistance, a state of grace and lightness, free of struggle.
Because true change isn't about fighting the outer world.
No. True change happens within, not without. You can't fight unconsciousness directly, he says. You can only bring in the light, your conscious presence.
Like Jesus saying, love your enemies, Tolle interprets that as.
Simply, have no enemies. Which means, have no internal resistance, no negative projections onto others or situations, accept what is.
Wow, what an incredible journey through these really transformative ideas. We've looked at how identifying with our mind creates that phantom self, the ego.
Right, and how the pain body is this accumulation of past suffering.
And how being trapped in psychological time, always past or future, keeps us from the richness of right now.
But then we saw the freedom, didn't we? The freedom that comes from watching the thinker, from disidentifying.
Yeah, and that possibility of transmuting pain, literally turning it into conscious presence, and the liberation of just embracing the timeless now.
And remembering relationships are maybe here to make us conscious, not just happy. Even collective pain can be a doorway.
Right. And ultimately that surrender isn't weakness at all, but this profound inner acceptance that actually allows for powerful conscious action.
Yeah, it's about shifting our core identity, moving from identifying with the fleeting forms of life, the thoughts, the emotions, the situations, to connecting with that timeless being within.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with. If Tolle is right, if consciousness is truly evolving through us, and if our collective consciousness does create the world we inhabit, what immediate, maybe seemingly small act of present moment awareness or surrender could you engage in right now? Just one small thing that might subtly but profoundly shift not just your own reality,
but maybe contribute in some tiny way to that new heaven and a new earth for all.
Exactly. Something to ponder.